Welcome everyone to today's webinar, where we'll be talking about some recent security additions to CircleCI, new features, and with a deep dive into our config policies feature. My name is Zan. I'm a developer advocate. I'm based in London, and I will be doing the first part of the session. With me are Derry.
Cheers, Anne. Yes, I'm Derry Bradley, Solutions Engineer at CircleCI. I'm based in the UK also, and been with the company for over a year now, but working in the space of software delivery for well over 3 years now. So, Sam, that's you.
And last but not least, we have Sagar, who is one of our security engineers. You want to say a couple of words, Sagar?
Sure. Yep. Hey, I'm Sagar. I'm a security developer based in Canada, in this company for a little more than a year now.
Cool. So it's great to have Sagar here. If you have any security specific questions, I'm sure he'll be the best person to answer. Anyway, let's continue with the rest of the session. So as I said, we will start with by talking about some of the recent access control features, security features in CircleCI, from a landscape to a bit more of a deeper dive. Then Derry is going to take us onto a deep dive into the config policies, which is very, very recent, and it's a very cool feature. And after that, we will go into a Q&A. Presume we'll have 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. If you have any questions during the session, please use the Q&A box in your Zoom window. This is a Zoom webinar, so you should see Q&A button on the screen. Use that and we'll get to you. If we don't get to every question, we will follow up with you asynchronously after the session. With this webinar, we also assume that you have at least some understanding of CircleCI as a user, experience configuring pipelines, running pipelines, etc. We assume you know how things are configured and how the dashboards work. But if you're completely new to CircleCI, please let us know now, and I can spend a couple of minutes giving you a bit of an intro. Otherwise, we will just jump into it. Cool. Okay, let's go on and talk about the first topic of the day. Some recent access control features. By recent, I mean things we released over the last year or so. We will start with a little overview of what's out there, the whole landscape of access control security features in CircleCI, and then talk about things like OIDC tokens and container runner in a bit more detail. So, security landscape. The way I like to think about this is in two parts. First part is essentially things that are part of the CircleCI platform, so features that are built in that you get by using the platform itself. On the other side, you have the whole ecosystem of external tools and APIs and partner integrations that you can use from your pipelines. Looking at the built-in features, we have to start with where things are actually executed. So on one end, you have the cloud version. So what you get when you go to app.circleci.com, hosted by us, managed by us, orchestrated by us. We provide the compute, you just provide the config. Everything happens on our infrastructure. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the on-prem solution. It's called CircleCI Server. It's what's installable on your infrastructure, on your Kubernetes cluster in particular. And essentially, that's where you provide the compute. You provide all the infrastructure that you need to run your workloads, which means you can run things behind the firewall. You can fulfill kind of higher regulatory requirements, you name it. Depending on your needs, one of those is the better option for you. In the middle, you have the hybrid version. It's called CircleCI Runner, which is basically compute that you host, but it's orchestrated through our cloud product. This works for virtual machines and also containers. And this is one of the things that Derry will be talking about a bit later on. It's called Container Runner, one of our newer addition to this. Things that are in bold, so this kind of hybrid environment, OIDC tokens and config policies is what we'll be addressing in more detail later. Beyond the actual environment, you have kind of more security features. First one is the contexts. Contexts are essentially a mechanism to provide job-specific secrets and access control within a workflow. So if we're looking at a pipeline, for example, this is one of my demo projects. You'll get the link to it after the webinar. Looking at the config, in the workflow at the bottom, you have all the jobs specified. And you can see that two of the jobs, so build and publish to Docker Hub and build and publish to AWS ECR, have a context specified. This context gives you access to credentials which are specific to this context, so that my Docker Hub job doesn't have the credentials that my ECR job has, which is great, so that we're giving it the least amount of access as possible. The other really cool feature is that you can actually set them up so that they're only accessible through a specific user group. For example, if you use GitHub, you have all these user groups in your organization that you can then specify who can access a specific job. If a developer triggers a particular job, a workflow that has a particular job, and that developer isn't part of that security group, this job will fail as a forbidden, I believe. So you can just add security groups in here. So for example, if you want your only infrastructure teams or platform teams accessing certain jobs, you can do so. Contexts are, like everything else in CircleCI, are also supported in the API. Everything and more that you can do in the UI, you can do through the API. This includes creating, retrieving, listing contexts, and also setting and rotating environment variables with ease. You can write bulk scripts to rotate your environment variables, populate them, etc. They will also show things like when things were last updated and so on. So a very powerful feature indeed. So yeah, these are contexts. They also, up until, from quite fairly recently, they also support OIDC tokens, which is another feature that provides kind of dynamic secrets we'll be talking about a bit later on. On the other side, beyond just kind of pure kind of security features, you have things that allow you to higher compliance and better governance. This includes config policies, what Derry will talking about, things like audit logs, so see what's happened in the platform over a certain period of time, and also IP ranges. So if you have a platform that you must ensure that is only accessible from CircleCI and no one else, you can request to turn on IP ranges, which will basically make sure that all the requests from CircleCI are coming from one of these kind of listed IP addresses. Again, things that you can turn on to make your platform a little bit more secure. So that's kind of landscape of built-in features. On the other side, we have a lot more, because obviously there's a whole ecosystem of the security tools and partners that you can use from within your pipelines. This includes external secrets management, such as HashiCorp Vault, or dependency scanners like Sneak, for example, or things that enable secrets detection like Git Guardian, and so on. We have a whole list of these either supported through orbs, so part of the things that you can integrate directly into config, or just by calling their APIs or by downloading their command line interfaces, CLIs in your pipelines and using them. You can do all of that. Lastly, recently we've released this tool called the Secret Inspector, which basically allows you to essentially print out all the secrets that are stored in a specific organization. So all the secrets in all the contexts, all the project secrets, and you see which ones they are. You see when they have been changed, so you can quickly go through them and list them and use them to rotate any secrets. So yeah, that's kind of broad overview of the whole landscape. Let's move on to the next bit, which is the OIDC tokens. So what are they? They basically are tokens that allow authentication using these or they're a mechanism that allows authentication through these short-lived, dynamically generated tokens, which are scoped to your CircleCI project. They basically are used to replace static secrets and keys, and they work with most of the major cloud vendors, secrets management tools like Vault I already mentioned, and more. And basically based on this OpenID Connect standard, so OIDC, that's what it means, which is again part of OAuth, or an extension to OAuth. They use JSON Web Token to to present themselves, so that they're all JSON. You can read them; they're human readable. And the idea is that they're issued from CircleCI, and they're available in every single job that uses a context. You have a job, use a context like one of these. It knows, CircleCI knows that it needs to issue you a OIDC token. And then you go with that, you take that token and set it up directly with the cloud provider. And basically they negotiate on your behalf. So you don't need to store any secrets. That's what we'll be looking at now. So I've got my job. I've applied a context. So I've set this AWS context. And now let's look at my context secrets, context environment variables. So I've got my region, I've got my ECR registry, I've got my ECR repository in there. So all AWS values, none of them are particularly secret. But when I go into the job steps, I can see that I've this added Circle OIDC token that's been created. That's this token that we can then use in AWS. One other thing is important here is this organizational ID. That's what that's part of the issuer of this token. And then you go into your IAM tool, for example, AWS, if we want to use that, and you create a new identity provider, which starts with oidc.circleci.com, org, and then your organization ID. And this audience is basically your organization ID. Once you have this provider set up, the type of the provider is obviously OpenID Connect token provider. You set up a role, which has this provider associated with it. And you can give it the policy. So in my case, I've created a new policy which just has my container registry management access permissions. And that's about it. Oh, the only other thing is, yeah, you can specify by default, they will be set so that any project within this organization will be able to assume this role. but you can also fine grain it so that you basically say only this specific project that I have here by kind of listing the kind of sub value, which is kind of the consumer coming, who's kind of requesting this token, can actually access this. And this is your project ID. Again, you have this in project settings. So this is this value here. And that's about it. That's about it. Now in our job, so build and publish image to AWS ECR, we can set up our AWS CLI again with an ORP. It's very simple. Provide the role ARN that you want to assume. So this is our role that's supported by this OIDC token, and give it a session duration. So that's how long the token is going to be alive. And then you can log into it, and that's about it. That's about it. And then you can use this to access the resources that you have specified in your policy. And then, yeah, this basically creates this short-lived token. Boom, done. And then configures everything, and things work nicely. And that's about it. So now I can actually take it over to Derry. I'll stop sharing and Derry will pick this up to talk about Container Runner.
Cheers, Anne. Thank you very much. Just making sure that everybody can see my screen. Dan, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see that Container Runner slide? Yeah, cool. Great. So yeah, cheers. Thank you very much. Let me just turn on my camera. Where is the option to do that? There we go. Okay, cool. So yeah, thank you all very much. So I basically got a couple of goals that I'm hoping to achieve on today's call. And the first of which is to basically have a quick recap of Container Runner. And I say recap because we published a webinar on this just a couple of months back. That's available on YouTube, and a link is going to be shared with you all very shortly. And the second then is and something I'm very excited about, is to do a bit of a dive into config policies, but more on that in a couple of minutes. So quick recap on Container Runner. So basically CircleCI ideated this technology that you can install on a Kubernetes cluster, and it's going to enable you to run containerized CI jobs on self-hosted compute. So the important words to note are Kubernetes cluster, self-hosted compute, and containerized CI jobs. And one of the problems that we were trying to solve when we released this feature is that if you think of our hosted compute model, basically high level, we have two executors. We have a Docker executor and we have a machine executor. But on our self-hosted runner model, and what a self-hosted runner is basically our flavor of a hybrid offering that enables engineering teams to run jobs on their own infrastructure. You can do so for any reason, but it's mainly for security and compliance reasons. So that's what a self-hosted runner is. And basically before Container Runner on self-hosted runner, obviously the Docker executor didn't exist, or that native Docker executor. We did have the machine runner, and some of you might know that it was possible to run Docker execution environments on this, but it was just a lot harder and a lot more work from the engineer's point of view. So one of the big reasons why we built that Container Runner job was to make it as seamless as possible for engineering teams to run those containerized jobs on self-hosted compute. The second problem, I guess, that we were trying to solve is around scalability. So if you were a DevOps engineer and you were in charge of maintaining 50 or 100 kind of runners before, you had to basically set up a runner, set up some sort of execution environment, set up a VM, and then you had to install a runner on them, and you had to manage and maintain all of that. And developers and engineers do not need that kind of overhead. It translates to a really high infrastructure management burden, again, making the technology difficult to adapt to and difficult to kind of manage. So Container Runner solves this by just installing that one container agent on the cluster. So then from a management point of view, this is the only thing that you need to manage. If you have 100 jobs, what will happen is that the container agent is going to spin up those jobs as pods and execute the jobs as containers within those pods. It's then going to tear them down automatically. So they're ephemeral by nature. So all you need to worry about from the end user point of view is this container agent. And this completely reduces the operational burden and again, the time to value for engineering teams. I get into a lot more detail on how the scaling works, how the installation works, how to build container images on Container Runner, and actually a demo as well on a link that if you're watching on YouTube will be somewhere around me now. And if you're live now, I think it's going to be posted in the chat. So if you want to know more about Container Runner, please head over there. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at derry@circleci.com. So now we're going to jump into config policies, and this is a new feature that we've released in the last few weeks and months, I believe actually. So I guess over the years, many of our users have kind of expressed an interest in locking down their CircleCI configurations while continuing to empower engineers. And we recognize that this is kind of difficult to enable both of these kind of things to work in tandem. But it is kind of the next step required to kind of propel software delivery to the next level for a lot of organizations. And with that in mind, in order to comply with engineering teams' needs to enforce security throughout the entire SDLC, we've added config policies to our growing list of features. Just to note here that this is only available to our scale plan customers. Kind of touched on the problem already, but just to re-emphasize that I guess it can be difficult to manage and then enforce organization-wide policies and security policies. In addition, every customer is going to have kind of a different mix of security requirements and pipeline managements. For example, they might need specific orbs to be in a config before it can trigger pipelines, or which contexts are allowed in a given configuration. So with config policies, we're trying to address how can we lock down configurations and org policies while continuing to empower engineers. And that's an extremely important piece here. So config policies uses a decision engine leveraging OPA to allow users to specify policies and return a decision if a pipeline's config complies with those policies. Basically, what it does is it adds a layer of control by allowing platform teams to create policies for CircleCI project configurations. In the strictest case, if a pipeline does not comply with the rules declared in an organization's policies, that pipeline will be blocked from running until it does comply. So in this example, in pipeline 269, we can see that I triggered it, and the first job was a unit testing job. I then set a policy on my organization that this project cannot be triggered if a unit testing job does not exist in the workflow. So therefore, when I commented out the unit testing job, we can see that the policy evaluation failed as that unit testing job is required. So I think you might be able to just see the power of this tool already. And I know some of you might be thinking this sounds amazing, but let's kind of talk some other examples and when we can use this. So organizations might have to pass every application through some sort of internal governance gate or some sort of security related job before that application can be deployed to production. In this case, you're going to want to make sure that that governance gate orb or your SecOps minded job that was optimized and built with the help of a CircleCI DevOps engineer is in a config before anything can trigger, any pipeline can trigger on that pipeline. So we can now write a policy to ensure that. Maybe every job that is executed in your workflow has to use a CircleCI certified image or an image that has a unique tag that has a tag unique to your company. We can now write a policy to ensure that. Some organizations might be more cost conscious than others, and you want each job that goes through kind of a config to use a certain resource class or size to optimize credit usage on CircleCI. We can now write a policy to ensure that. So a quick quote, if it's in a config, you can manage it with config policies. By giving security teams the ability to control what must or what must not be in this config file, customers now have the ability to have secure controls across any attribute that would appear in a config. With these config policies, you're giving engineers and developers the freedom to write their own config and delivery pipelines while ensuring that organization level policies to impose rules around which configuration elements are required, allowed, not allowed, etc. are in place. So I hope we're starting to see kind of the value of what this config policies can bring to kind of some platform and SecOps minded teams. Let's jump into some really kind of cool use cases with this feature now. So we can actually start to restrict credential access by project. Now, this now means that a context, which is a shared grouping of environment variables, can be designed for specific projects and then protected in config policy by the project ID. So this is massive for platform teams who want to group secrets but restrict their use to a single project. And we can see in a couple of screen grabs here from our config policy playground, which is a space that you can write and iterate on your policies with rapid feedback. We're going to get to that in a couple of minutes. But first, we can see the result that is passed back when this config above was executed against a policy that restricts credential access by project. We can see the hard fail status here that the decision engine returns, and we can see the user-friendly string that we provided when we wrote the policy. And this is also going to be visible in the UI, like we saw a couple of minutes ago on my sample project. We can see that we're passing in a context, not my context. That context is not allowed to be used in this project. Okay. In the next example, we can see the same policy. We can see the same policy with a compliant config. So we are allowed to pass in. We did configure this config in the policy to be enabled on this project. So we can see the status down the bottom. Then we're in a pass state. A second really cool use case is restricting environments access and then enforcing with policies on the branch. So this is absolutely massive and puts CircleCI well on its way to offering that kind of branch-based secrets model. So that means if we have a dev branch, we can lock secrets down to that dev branch. More importantly, I guess if we have a prod branch, we can lock production secrets down to that production branch. This is a massive enablement for platform and secure SecOps minded teams, again, kind of across the board. We can see a config here that would be executed against that OPA decision engine for a given organization. One of the policies that are on this org restricts contexts by the branch, and only prod context can be accessed by the main branch. We can also see, however, in this workflow, I'm triggering this work. I'm enabling content. I'm trying to enable context to be accessed by this dev branch. And what's going to happen then is we're going to see a hard fail with a customized message back to the end user. And that's going to be available in the UI. It's also going to be available in the Visual Studio Code extension, which we might get a quick look at later on also. So here we are. You cannot use production-based context, this context here with the prod string outside of a main branch. So again, massive enablement for teams across the board. And I hope you can start to see and maybe think about other use cases where this might come in very handy. Cool. So we have an idea what CPM is, I hope, and we've seen some use cases. So how can we start to write policies? So policies are written in Rego, and Rego is declarative. So policy authors can focus on what queries should return rather than how the query should be executed. All policies must belong to the package org and declare the policy name in the Rego file. So that means that policies are created at the organization level, that CircleCI organization, which is inherited from the GitHub organization. In order to apply a policy and make that live on an organization, you must be an org admin. I'm going to repeat that. So in order to apply and make a policy live on an organization, you must be an org admin. So this gives platform teams control and enables the standardization of best practice across your organization's projects and then across different teams. And that might raise the question, well, doesn't this stifle kind of the empowerment of developers in terms of contributing policies to an org for, let's say, I guess, projects that are specific to their team? Well, CircleCI has ideated a way to kind of address this, and I'm going to show you that quickly in a few minutes. So back over to, I guess, what makes up a policy. So I want to kind of think of policies in a hierarchical state. So a policy is made up of rules, and a rule is made up of three things. It's made up of an evaluation, an enforcement, and an enablement. So an evaluation evaluates whether the config contains that policy violation. So this is how the decision engine determines if a config violates the given policy. So there's basically going to be a check condition in the evaluation. And in this example, we see it checks that all images pass through this loop start with CircleCI, hence there's a certified CircleCI image that's owned, maintained, and hydrated by us. If they don't, we're going to return that user-friendly string and basically tell the decision engine that this config violates the policy. Okay. So we have an evaluation. We also have an enforcement. So this determines how the violation should be enforced. So basically we have a hard fail, which is basically going to stop, or that's not going to enable the triggering of the pipeline at all. But just a disclaimer, we also have a soft fail, and the soft fail is the default. So if the policy service detects that the config violated a rule that's a soft fail, the pipeline is going to be triggered, and that violation will be logged and can be viewed in the decision log from the CLI. We're going to take a look at the CLI in a couple of minutes. So we have an evaluation, we have an enforcement, and then we have an enablement. And basically an enablement, for an enablement, a rule must be enabled for it to be inspected by policy violations. So rules that aren't enabled, when you write your Rego files, they can basically be used as helper rules for other policies, if that makes sense, and other rules. So if you don't have this enable rule, basically that won't be enabled on the organization when you push that policy up. So the pipeline metadata that is available in those Rego files, we can get access to the project ID, we can get access to the branch, and we can get access to the build number. And this is some really, really powerful stuff. Again, when we think back to some of those examples that we were talking about earlier. So with this kind of metadata, we can manipulate the engine to do some really, really cool things, basically around credential protection, but also around that environment protection that we saw already. Into the kind of looking at the playground space now. And this playground space was basically designed so engineers can come to write, iterate, and test out their policies against CircleCI config.yamls. This is a space that I encourage you all to use, and we encourage you all to use, I should say, as it's going to significantly decrease the development time of your policies, as there's no need to apply policies, writing policies. Sorry, there's no need to apply the policies, pushing up config then to test against it. This can all be done from within this space. So in here, you'll see we have a space to write a policy. We have a space to input a config to test against that policy, and then we're going to see the decision that the engine sent back down below. So in this example, we can see the policy name declared. We can see that the rule is enabled. We can see we configured it to have a hard fail. So the required orbs is that evaluation step here. And then in the evaluation, we have some sort of check. So we're saying we want to require the orbs, the security orb with this version 1.2.3 and the custom version 1.0.0. We can see that this config now passes against this policy. But if I was to change that config to a version that does not comply with this kind of evaluation, we can see that hard fail that's sent back. So this is an area that we encourage you all, and definitely encourage you all to come and kind of start writing, testing out your policies. Again, a link to all of this is going to be shared with you after the call. I'm going to jump back over to our webinar now. And we're going to kind of address how we can start to manage policies. So policies can be managed through the CLI. First things first, right? And I'm just going to move this kind of bar because it's a way. And if we jump over to the terminal, what we can see straight away is if you download the latest version of the CircleCI CLI, shout out to the design here. I think it's really, really cool, pretty neat. We can see our policy command that now exists as a subcommand to our CircleCI kind of parent command. Okay. If we hit help, so if we hit a CircleCI, how do I spell circle? CircleCI policy help. What we can see then is all the kind of subcommands that exist for those policies. So we can fetch all the policies that exist within an organization. We can access all the decision logs for a given organization also from the CLI. We can see our push command, which is the one I'm going to call out. So this is important, as this is actually going to apply and push those policies to a given organization. And just to call out again, you must be an admin to push the policies. And finally, I guess just a look here. So it is kind of, it's going to be important to be able to kind of deploy new policies with kind of confidence, knowing when they'll be applied, knowing the decisions that they're going to generate ahead of time. So to enable this process, the CircleCI policy test command is available. And the test command is inspired by the Golang and OPA test commands. So if I jump back over to the browser here, again, that is in my way. So what we can see here is we can see some documentation we have around config policies. Here, some pretty fledged out documentation that you can jump in, have a look at. Again, any questions, feel free to reach out. But you'll see the test config policies, and this is a very detailed approach to how CircleCI is recommending you to start kind of testing policies on CircleCI. So this is pretty cool, and again, the link is going to be available to you all. So I guess this all sounds really great, but is it really best practice to start pushing and applying policies from the terminal? And as you all know, very similar to building, testing, and deploying software, the answer to that is no, because best practice comes in the form of utilizing a VCS and a policy pipeline. On top of keeping track, I guess, of all the code modifications, catching unintended human errors, all the benefits of the VCS, what it also enables is that collaboration of developers wanting to contribute to an organization's policies. And you might be thinking, okay, Derry, great, but you said only org admins can apply and push policies. Well, this is true. So I guess what we can do is we can jump over here and just have a quick look. This is my team's organization on GitHub, and we have a CircleCI policies repo. If we jump into, so we see we have an applied policies, okay, and we have example policies. This just might be a space where you'll provide some examples so developers can come in and start looking and see what it's actually like to write a Rego file. In the applied policies space, we have all the policies that are applied on this organization. We're going to see how we do that in a couple of minutes. You might have project-specific policies here. You might have user or team-specific policies like we have outlined here. Okay, so here's my CircleCI sample project, and that has that unit testing job that we saw to fail at the very beginning. Okay, so we require that the unit testing job is in every config that gets pushed through on this project. Okay. Going to jump back into circles. Going to jump into our config now, just to kind of take a quick look and just address that issue around kind of, okay, how can developers contribute to this? So the first thing that we can do is we can save the CircleCI CLI token and the GitHub token of our admin as environment variables. Okay. When the developer then wants to write policies, they can basically open a feature branch and begin to start writing their policies, and they can then test out their policies with the documentation that we provided on that branch. When they're happy, they can open up a PR. Okay, so you'll notice here then that I guess what can happen then is the org admin or the engineer in control of the organization's policies can then begin the review process. If they're happy, the branch can be merged in, and this is then going to trigger this apply policies job. Okay, so the apply policies job is only going to be triggered on that main branch that we see here. The testing policies will, and that's why we encourage kind of the testing and ensure that a solid testing process is in place for these policies. And if so, it's going to merge into the main branch, it's going to trigger this apply policies job. We're going to take a look at what is in this apply policies job. Just take a look at this for today. we can see we have the CircleCI policy push. We're pointing to those applied policies, that applied policy folder in the root of our VCS. And we're going to provide the owner ID, which is just the organization ID. And under the hood, that's going to pick up the CircleCI CLI token of the admin and the GitHub admin token. So that's just a quick overview. If there's any questions on that and you want to kind of figure out how to implement this for your organization, just feel free to reach out. And we can kind of have a conversation around that, no problem. So the last thing that I want to show you, and I guess are really nice to have around these config policies, is the integration with the VS Code extension that was pushed out by our developer experience team recently. So now developers can actually validate that a config is compliant with the organization's policies from within the VCS itself. And again, this is kind of showcasing how when it comes to developer experience, CircleCI is at the forefront of the market for sure. No context switching what's so needed. All a developer needs to do is basically click this kind of CircleCI logo in the top right of the screen. When you open the CircleCI config file, click validate against an org policy. You're going to choose the organization, you're going to choose a config file, and you're going to choose a branch to validate that against. And in the bottom right, what you're going to see is that decision engine kind of sends back based on your organization's policies. That policy file passes the policy validation. So I guess what does this kind of feature do? So we're kind of increasing developer productivity, developer happiness and speed without adding any headache to kind of platform or security minded teams at all. And that's what we're enabling here with the release of this kind of integration. So I've kind of covered a lot of what I want to cover today. So I guess we can all, again, thank you all for attending. I'm going to open it up to Q&A now. So yeah, let's see where we're at with Q&A.
That's great. We already have a couple of questions, or more than a couple, actually. We've answered a few already, and yeah, let's just go through them. There was 2 or 3 questions on the topic of setting security groups and user groups to context through the API. We don't currently support that, unfortunately, but I will definitely be taking that to the product team and making sure that they're aware how popular this is. The folks who have asked it, if you don't mind just following up with me, Zan at CircleCI.com. There, you'll get my email anyway, but if you have any more background of what you'd like to see and why, I can definitely take that back to the product teams. So yeah, I hope this answers you. There were a couple of questions for the config policies. Yeah. Do you or Sagar want to take that?
Yeah, I can jump in on some of them here. Let me just take a look. So there's a question here around, is it possible to enable config policies on some repos only instead of the whole org? Absolutely, and we can do that through that project ID metadata key that we saw. So if you want to apply policies to just certain projects or certain repos, you can do so by accessing that metadata key project ID. Second question. So are there plans to provide an official tool to manage the entire policy stuff, such as infrastructure of code, or is there a recommended way using a pipeline? Okay, so I hope that might have been asked before I addressed that kind of at the end there, going through that flow and showing kind of the GitHub repo, opening feature branches, and then under the hood applying those kind of the relevant tokens. If that's not 100% clear, please reach out to me at derry@circleci.com, and yeah, we can follow up on that for sure. But again, this recording is going to be sent out also, so hopefully that will cover that. Do env vars referenced in the config.yaml files get evaluated prior to the evaluation by the config policy? My understanding of that is no. I believe nothing is evaluated if the policy does not comply, if the config does not comply with the policy and there's a hard fail. If I'm wrong, Sagar, please jump in. But my understanding is that my understanding is no, basically. So those environment variables will not be kind of processed by CircleCI at all. Config policy management is only available on the scale plan. That is correct. Currently it is. I don't believe there's any plans to open it up to everyone at the minute. It is only available to scale plan customers. Zan, this one might be back over to you. There's just, are there any other ways, or Sagar maybe, are there any other ways of using AWS OIDC against multiple accounts within a job?
Yeah, this user wanted to know if we could access different AWS accounts based on the branch name for a job. I do not think we have any branch name logic OIDC injection right now, so we cannot do that. But we can look into this further because this is a really good real life scenario. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, like if you have any more like background about this, anything else, any more info to share with us over email, please do email us, because the more context we have about your use case, etc., the better it is for us to then take that to the product team.
Cool. And then there's a final question here. Do config policies work together with dynamic configurations? And the answer for that is yes. I believe a simple yes, they do. And Sagar, again, feel free to jump in if that is not sufficient.
I can look into this further, but my understanding is that it is not you're not using the dynamic configurations. Instead, it just fetches the static configuration, and then we can work on them. But since we have this understanding, I think this is a good opportunity to look into this further.
Absolutely is.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks for that question, and I can see the user sent that through, so I'll be sure to kind of address that in any follow-up.
Cool. Any more questions at this point? Looks like no. In which case, thank you all for attending. Thank you all for an impressive level of engagement. I hope this has been useful to you all. As we said, you will receive the recording by email. You'll receive the slides and obviously also our contact information if you want to follow up with any questions or if any further questions pop up. And with that, let's say our farewells.
Cheers, folks.
Folks.
Thank you.